Corey Costello, and this is TehachaPod's Eye on the Capitol. Eye on the Capitol is an informative look at state and national legislation that impacts your life in Tehachapi. From new proposals, new laws, and even future ballot measures, we do the research and pass on that information while you go about your life. On today's episode, State Senator Shannon Grove doubles down on her battle against child sex trafficking by targeting buyers of victims, but is already facing opposition. Assemblyman Vince Fong secured a key victory in court as he continues his campaign for Congress. The state budget is back in the news prior to the governor's May revision. A local Assemblywoman gets a small victory on her quest to bring a medical campus to Kern County, and the National Eye on the Economy questions tariffs on imports and inflation once again. We start with State Senator Shannon Grove, who last year successfully advocated for SB 14, which made sex trafficking a felony. Yes, it was a misdemeanor in some cases prior, and it took some action by Governor Newsom himself to break the party politics line to get the right thing done, and it was. Now, Grove is addressing another loophole in the law, because if someone is trafficking victims, there obviously is a buyer, and that buyer is the target of this latest legislation, SB 1414. This time, the Bakersfield Republican Grove has partnered with Democrats Susan Rubio and Ana Caballero to address current law shortfalls that Grove claims don't go far enough, adding that adults who buy a child for sex can only be charged with a misdemeanor. Often, a person convicted of purchasing child sex will get a maximum punishment of 6 months in jail. SB 1414 was passed out of the Senate Public Safety Committee, however, with amendments that lessen the impact of the bill, according to Grove. The changes included the age of the protected minor being lowered to 15 and younger and not 17 and younger as proposed by Grove, and the penalty was changed to allow offenders to serve time in county jail or pay a fine. Grove was joined in Sacramento by hotel heiress Paris Hilton, who formed an unlikely alliance with Grove to address the issue within the state. Grove was unhappy following the amendments forced on SB 1414 in the Senate Public Safety Committee.
Most of these people standing behind me are survivors that were brutally attacked by their buyers. They're the ones that came to us and said, address the buyer situation. And we did that. The committee forced amendments on us, on my bill that I declined to accept. And it only lessens the impact that we can go after. They want to exclude 16, 17 years old. They want to exclude them from this.
Grove went on to explain the amendments to her bill on her Facebook page, writing, quote, "What I proposed in Senate Public Safety with SB 1414, make the solicitation or purchase of children for sex a felony with prison time, up to a $25,000 fine, sex offender registry for repeat offenders. What three members of the Senate Public Safety Committee did with their forced amendments, make the solicitation or purchase of children for sex punishable by a wobbler, which can still be charged as a misdemeanor, punishable by as little as 2 days in jail or up to a $10,000 fine, can be charged as a felony only if the child being purchased is 15 years old or younger, but still the buyer is ineligible for prison, jail time only. This excludes 16 and 17-year-olds from additional protections, which is still a misdemeanor, to purchase them for sex. If a buyer has a previous conviction of purchasing a child under 16 years old and is convicted on a second offense of buying a child under 16 years old and the victim and buyer are more than 10 years apart in age, the buyer would register as a Tier 1 sex offender for 10 years. I don't understand why protecting children in this state from sexual predators is so incredibly difficult. Please keep in mind you have to be 18 years old to buy a lottery ticket." End quote. You've probably seen Assemblyman Vince Fong's name on the ballot plenty this election season following the resignation of Kevin McCarthy from Congress. The Assemblyman, representing much of Kern County, was embroiled in a legal challenge to keep him from running for Congress on the ballot after he had filed for re-election to the California Assembly. Fong has been the top vote-getter to both fulfill the remaining term of McCarthy and the full-term election set for November. A California appeals court once again recently sided with Fong, rebuking the California Secretary of State's challenge to his candidacy even after a pair of elections for the congressional seat. A judge ruled in Fong's favor, which took advantage of a loophole that was not corrected by the state when they chose to go with open primaries in 2010. The ruling allows Fong to continue his campaign for Congress while he remains the lone candidate for his assembly seat. Fong will face off against Tulare County Sheriff Mike Boudreau in a runoff election in May to fulfill the remaining term of McCarthy, which expires in December. The winner is expected to be sworn into Congress following the 30-day certification period and will have the distinction to appear on the November ballot for a new 2-year term as the incumbent. Fong will also be on the ballot for the assembly seat. However, should he be elected to Congress, he will vacate his California assembly seat, and voters will have a special election in 2025 to choose his replacement. Meanwhile, Assemblyman Fong continues his work in Sacramento, most notably as a member of the Assembly Budget Committee, who are anticipating Governor Newsom's May revision, which followed his initial budget draft released back in January to the state Senate. The talk since the initial proposal was the anticipated budget shortfall, estimated by the Legislative Analyst's Office to be in the range of some $70 billion, while the governor contested that statement with his own math, far reducing that number by borrowing from funds and pausing some previously funded initiatives. On April 15th, the governor and legislative leaders announced an early action plan to address some of those shortfalls prior to the May revision announcement and the serious budget negotiations set to start this spring. The early action plan includes salary savings from open positions in state government, cutting a school facilities program, and several climate initiatives delaying funding for public transit. The $17.3 billion package includes some program cuts, but mostly relies on new revenue, internal borrowing, and funding delays to shift for savings. It is expected to come up for a vote in the legislature next week. Among the major proposals are nearly $4 billion in expansion of tax on health insurance plans that allows the state to draw matching federal funds, delaying $1 billion for transit infrastructure and $550 million for preschool, transitional kindergarten, and full-day kindergarten facilities, shifting $1.8 billion of cap-and-trade revenue intended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to backfill other programs, and reducing funding for state departments by more than $760 million based on their vacant positions, while deferring another $1.6 billion in employee pay. Republican leaders, including Assembly Republican leader James Gallagher of Chico, have referred to the plan as gimmicky. Fong recently weighed in on a budget appropriations bill, AB 106, for some one-time state funds, alluding to the governor's approach to covering budget shortfalls as well as this bill.
The math still doesn't add up. In the face of a $73 billion deficit projected by the Independent Legislative Analyst's Office, who has historically been more accurate when it comes to deficit projections, the $3.2 billion of reductions, delays, fund shifts, and borrowing only pushes this crisis into the future. We need structural reforms to rein in spending. Even with this deficit, it's not like this state is out of money. There is still over $200 billion to spend. Our budget crisis is being driven by overspending, which has put California's finances on an unsustainable path, a fact that I've highlighted in every single floor speech I have given on the budget. Nearly all of these adjustments are unspent one-time funds from last year, and less than 1% are ongoing reductions that are needed to reduce deficits in future years. Clearly, more needs to be done to get our fiscal house in order. In fact, this bill will even increase the state's debt. Approximately $1.4 billion is borrowed from special funds that will cost the state even more. This $1.4 billion is on top of the $3 billion the state already borrows from special funds. Eventually, the state has to repay this debt with interest. The biggest accounting gimmick in this plan is the punting of 1 month's salary for state workers from the fiscal year up to the next from June to July. State costs remain the same, but this deferral artificially reduces the budget by $1.6 billion. It should come as no surprise that in the private sector, businesses are not allowed to do this on their taxes. Papering over the massive budget hole and declaring victory does not make the financial problems go away. Instead of acting in the world of fiscal reality, the governor relies on gimmicks to delay the inevitable at the expense of future budgets.
Meanwhile, Assembly Bill 2357, authored by Assemblywoman Jasmeet Baines, who represents a portion of Kern County, advanced to the Assembly Education Committee as she is calling for a UC medical campus in Kern County. The bill would establish an endowment fund, a corporation in the form of a board with the intent of establishing a UC medical campus in the San Joaquin Valley. Baines first floated this idea earlier this year at the State of the County address in Bakersfield.
I spent last year learning about our state legislature, how the state legislature works, and more importantly, I learned what our state legislature thinks of us. Time after time, I saw Sacramento weaponize the Valley's health disparities against us. Our poor health outcomes have become blunt instruments that outside groups use to attack our economy and our way of life, shutting down energy production, forcing farmers to fallow their land, shipping dairies out of state, banning trucks and tractors, and refusing to invest in new water storage. This is Sacramento's prescription for the Valley, but their medicine is worse than the disease. What we need are more opportunities for our young people to dream big. I was forced to leave the Valley when I went to medical school, but I am one of the few doctors that came back. Most do not. Once they leave smaller rural communities, most medical students never return. The Valley is the best in the world at growing fruits and vegetables, but we need to learn how to grow our doctors here. In that spirit of growing your own and addressing the severe lack of access to healthcare in Kern, I am excited to announce some breaking news. Next month, I will introduce legislation to bring a University of California medical school to Kern County. We have to start training medical students who are born and raised here and who have the roots that will encourage them to practice medicine close to home. This project will also create good paying middle-class jobs and help diversify our economy so that there are opportunities to succeed for people of all backgrounds. I could not be prouder to use this night to announce this effort. We must commit to growing our own.
AB 2357 now heads to the Assembly Budget Appropriations Committee for another reading. On the national scene, inflation continues to grow, which has slowed the expectations of base interest rate cuts by the Federal Reserve Bank. An inflation report in early April exceeded the 2% target goal for the Fed, with increased prices on items such as fuel and food. This has prompted a continuation of the Fed's wait-and-see approach. Job growth continues with a nod to the influx of migration, but is expected to cool as the pool of qualified laborers is exhausted. A recent Wall Street Journal poll showed respondents now anticipating just 2 base rate cuts by the end of the year, down from the 4 or so initially predicted, with an estimate that base rates will end 2024 at 4.75%. Recent comments by President Biden in urging a tripling of tariffs on Chinese steel imports may make the case for a recently approved Kern County micromill steel project. Last month, the Kern County Planning Commission approved Pacific Steel Group's proposal for a micromill project between Mojave and Roseman that will recycle steel and turn it into usable rebar for projects. Pacific Steel representatives cited the lack of U.S. steel mills and the increased reliance of foreign imports. In Pennsylvania, President Biden called for key tariff rates on Chinese steel and aluminum products to increase to 25% from 7.5%. That higher levy would be in addition to a separate 25% tariff on steel and a 10% duty on aluminum imposed under the Trump administration. A senior administration official said the higher tariffs would only affect about 0.6% of U.S. demand for steel. A recent surge in Chinese exports has alarmed the Biden administration, helping resolve internal debates over the economic wisdom of tariffs. The administration is concerned that the flood of cheaper Chinese steel is undercutting the value of American steel, leading to artificially low prices. The Biden administration is also opposing the takeover of the company U.S. Steel by Japanese company Nippon Steel, urging that the industrial icon should remain domestically owned. The president has the ability to block the transaction under national security powers, though Biden hasn't committed to actually doing so. The Kern County project could have an impact on the market or reduce the influx of Chinese steel that is shipped to Mexico and imported to the U.S., circumventing the imposed tariffs. That's the latest from Eye on the Capitol. If you have a question or would like more information about one of the topics covered or have an idea for a future episode, email us at media@TehachaPiCityHall.com. Until next time, you keep living up Tehachapi, and we'll keep an eye on the Capitol.